रेडियो जिंदगी 92.3 FM HD2 पे वेलकम लिसनर्स, मैं हूं आपके साथ में ईरा. वेलकम टू द शाह Pirali Law Show brought to you by the Shah Pirali Law Group. We are once again joined by Attorney Shah Pirali on air with us. Attorney Shah Pirali is the founder, president and managing attorney of the Shah Pirali Law Group, which is headquartered right here in Newark, California. He is a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association as well as the State Bar of California. He is a passionate advocate of human rights, civil rights, social action, and social services, and he has a strong interest in and knowledge of the political and the legal system here in the US. He formed his law group to work on the causes that he feels most ardently about. The law group focuses on immigration law with an emphasis on employment-based immigration. He helps his clients all over the US. So whether you're in San Francisco or Washington, D.C. or East Coast or West Coast or anywhere, you can be helped because they do have offices in Newark here in California, San Francisco here in California, and also Washington, D.C. on the East Coast. Listeners, if you'd like to get in touch with him, you can call us right now during the show on the studio number 510-657-1170. That's right. 657-1170. You can also get in touch with him after the show on his direct number 510-742-5887. Well, you can also call on that number right now as we speak. Since it's an office number, you can call on that number and make an appointment 510-742-5887 and get all the information about Attorney Shah Pirali and his team and the practice on the website piralilaw.com. That's PEERALLYLAW.com. So without any further delay, Attorney Shah, good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Ira. Thank you for the nice intro. And then for all the listeners who are new to the show, I'm an attorney in the Bay Area. And like you mentioned, we pretty much practice immigration law all over the country, and even we have clients overseas. And before I start, anything I'm going to tell you today is my opinion. You should not act or refrain to act solely on the information provided. You should contact an attorney if you have any questions. The number to our office, 510-742-5887. Or you can check our website, piralilaw.com, like my last name, and LAW added.com. Talking about what's happening out there on immigration, for one, Yemen now has an extension on the TPS. A TPS is a temporary protected status. So if you're from Yemen or born in Yemen and you're in the US, you will be able to get that. And under Trump, we had there was no TPS, there was a ban actually for people from Yemen. So that's on one good news. And the second good news also is under Trump, they had removed asylum for people who are victims of gang rape or domestic abuse. So one of the things that asylum grants was what is an asylum is basically when you fear persecution or fear for your life in your home country, but you have to belong to a certain group. For example, it can be your religion, your political affiliation, etc., etc. You are eligible for asylum. Lately, with all the things happening in the world, a lot of people have turned kind of eligible for asylum. And under Trump, they made it very, very difficult. And one of them now, not one of them, something that was there before. In South America, we used to have a lot of, we still have them, a lot of gang rape and gang-related abuses, sexual abuses, etc., etc. Unfortunately, everywhere where we have war, it's been like that for years, for ages. People know the stories of Mongols invading Asia and then raping and stealing and all the stuff. But this is also happening now. And if you are victims of those kind of situations, you might be able to file for an asylum. How it relates to what's happening to Asia, we know before COVID, we had this increase of sexual violence even in India or in other parts of Asia, and those people might be eligible. I'm not saying they will, okay? So asylum is a very case-by-case situation. So people who are victims of such cases might actually be able to file for an asylum. And that kind of relate also to our situation on H4 visa holders. Remember, Ira, we are fighting for people who are on H4 visas, and one of the things that's happening is many of them are being abandoned or getting they are victims of abuses in the U.S. and then ultimately they don't really call the cops to get a U visa, and if they go back, they might actually be victims of certain things very similar to that, and if they are. I remember I had a case from the Philippines, something kind of similar, where if she goes back, because she was married to some kind of high class person, they usually gang rape the person, and that's what I think it was the Philippines or somewhere else. So, sorry, I'm not sure which country it was. So it was kind of a common thing. So this is something that can be used. Although I didn't file the case, but I had a situation like that. We were able to win on other grounds, but asylum might be available for people like that. So remember, don't make up stories, by the way. Don't come and tell me, oh, this will happen to me. And the truth is that it won't happen because I won't take the case in the first place. I'm very picky when it comes to asylum. I dig very deep before I take them. And under the Real ID Act, you have to prove everything you say. And if you make a mistake on one, everything crumbles. Not mistake. If you lie, everything will crumble. I repeat that. A lot of people, they don't realize the Real ID Act is very, very horrible. And at the same time, it's a very protective thing. For example, let's say you have a very good case of asylum, but then they ask you for a birth certificate and you give a fake one. The entire case might crumble just because of that one birth certificate. So be very, very careful. And right now, if you look at many cases we are having when it comes to the adjustment of status, many people from India, back before everything was kind of recorded, there was no birth certificate, right? So one of the ways to prove that is we have to prove, first, we have to show that there's an availability of the birth certificate. Second, then you get 2 affidavits, and plus you get also other kinds of records. For example, you get things like school records, medical records, ration cards, pictures, you name it, everything that proves the case. And lately we have been receiving a lot of IFEs and all those I-485s. Even people are submitting all this, they're still not happy sometimes. So in those cases, you might have to dig deeper and get more stuff to prove your date of birth. Because a lot of people take the shortcut and they will come up with things that are not really viable or which are made up. So be very, very careful on that part. Whenever you give fraudulent documents to the USCIS, your entire case might crumble. And when I say might crumble, it might you will lose everything because of 1 or 2 small things. So don't take a shortcut. I'll give you an example. I had a situation back in the days when I asked for a birth certificate and there was no divorce certificate actually. And there was a divorce, everything was done, but then since the person didn't, he asked his brother to go and get a copy of the divorce certificate from the court. And since the court was kind of far, what the brother did, he contacted an attorney who made up a fake divorce certificate. There was a real divorce in another state, so he made one from this state and then submitted it. And what he did at the end, when they did investigate that person, they found out that this person produced a fake divorce decree, and ultimately the entire case fell. And when the case was very strong, we could have won. Just because of that, now the person was charged of fraud and misrepresentation under 2126C1, and that what it did, it kind of made him inadmissible. And now to get a waiver for that is very, very difficult. So don't get into giving fraudulent documents. It will cost you very, very dearly. It's better to fight the case and say you don't have something and keep fighting it until you get something to prove your situation rather than making up documents. I repeat that, never make up documents because it might cost you very, very dearly. And I've seen it too many times in my cases. So when I handle cases. So be very, very careful on that. Don't also, if you hire an attorney abroad, make sure that attorney is not a crook or something, because that's something very, very common, where they will shortcut the system and give us fake documents. The State Department and the USCIS now are very familiar with countries like India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and they know when they are being submitted fake documents. And they can easily hire an investigator, go and check on the situation. And when they find out you lied, your case, even though it is very strong, might end up by a failure. So be very careful on that. So it is important. Any question on that, Ira?
No, you're right. When initially when I read this article and we were talking, I was also concerned not to diminish people who are actually victims, who do go through such difficult ordeals, such as, difficult time. But then there are also concerns about authenticity. And, that's what you have been talking about. Do not make things up just because. I also had one question, Attorney Shah. Is claiming it enough, or do you really have to, how do you prove such things? Isn't that even more difficult?
Indeed, that's exactly the problem. So, for example, certain cases, it will be related on the news, right? So in this case, it is kind of obvious if it comes from a reliable source. It has to be a reliable news agency. Some of them will be on the police report because of sometimes you will have the police still taking a statement, although they don't do anything about it. And also, you might get situations of medical reports, right? For example, let's say usually rape comes with violence, right? So they go to the hospital and you end up getting documents of that. And fortunately, some people will produce fake ones. And in these cases, if they investigate, they find out that you lied blatantly about it, and they know the documents are not authentic. By the way, they do something called forensic, forgot how they call it, documentation. They do a forensic on the documents.
Okay.
And what they do, this is how they usually determine if a document is kind of authentic or not, right? For example, if you produce a birth certificate, which is supposed to be from the 1980s or the 1960s, and when they look at the paperwork, the document is only printed like yesterday, they will know on that. However, there's something called a latent reprinting. If you tell them, yes, I had it, but I had to request a new one, so they printed it recently. Now, just to as a footnote there, in India now we have something called a latent birth certificate. Like, I think most people know, like India has been kind of digitalizing the entire system. And now people who didn't have a birth certificate at the origin are now being issued a birth certificate. Those birth certificates are not considered as primary evidence. I repeat that. They are not considered as primary evidence. What it means is that if something is a primary evidence, that means it stands on its own. For example, someone who has a birth certificate now, it's an authentic document because it stands on its own. You don't have to have other documents to prove this. But when you have a latent birth certificate, is kind of similar to not having a birth certificate. You still have to produce secondary evidence to back it. So, for example, you have to produce like affidavits, 2 affidavits from people who knew you at the time of birth and who knew that you were born on that date, etc., etc. And usually don't get people younger than you, because that's impossible. Someone cannot be witnessing to your birth when you were born. When you were born, for example, like in 75, and that person is born in the 80s, they can't witness your birth, right? So you cannot use those people. You need someone who's at least a little bit older than you. So those are stuff that they're looking for, and we see that very often when you file the adjustment of status, where when you're putting the birth certificate or a non-availability of birth certificate, etc. So it is important to get the right documents, but also if you don't have a document, we will have to substantiate it with other documents. I hope that answers some of your inquiries, right? I think you were talking more about the other issues of the fake documents, right?
Well, not really documents. I was talking about when my point was really when you talked about rape or gang violence. Let's say. Let's say, for example, the situation if something happens in a country like India, and I'm not trying to point anything out. I'm just giving an example. Let's say something that happens in a foreign country, something outside US, and if someone wants to file an asylum over here about that, then if somebody files an asylum based on that, then also do the investigations happen and all the reports need to be produced, which something that happened back then in some other country, all the documents from there. And what if there was no FIR? What if there's no evidence of something that happened like that? What happens in that case?
That's a very good question. Under the Real ID Act, if you don't substantiate what you're saying, you will lose the case. It's very kind of direct now. It used to be a declaration from that person will be good enough to win, but without substantiating at least evidence that points to that, you will not. For example, a medical record that says, hey, you had bruises that are consistent with rape, that will be good enough. But if, let's say, you go and you show a medical document that you have bruises that are consistent with a fight or something like that, it might work or it might not work. So it all depends on the weight of the document. So the answer is very simple. You don't have it, you won't get it probably, because just the declaration will not be good enough to substantiate a case. And that has been in everything in asylum. And now, since the Real ID Act, I think it was 2005 or 2003 it was passed. And since then, it has been like that. It has its good and bad, unfortunately, and that was in the bush. And that's how you really kind of have to prove your case, because just your words will not be enough. Now, you can also have affidavits from other people who testified to that. Now, the weight of the affidavit will depend on the affiant, which is the people who are giving the affidavit. So those people, if they are not really consistent, or the government feel that they cannot trust them because they are too close to that victim or the applicant, they're not going to get it. So it's a case by case basis, and that's where a good lawyer who understands that, who prepares the case very carefully, will make a difference. Because just having looking at things from a perspective of hey, I'm going to get an asylum, I'm just going to file, it's not going to work, because a lot of people have been doing that in the past, and they have won, by the way, in the past. It was a lot easier in the 80s, etc., until things changed in the 2000s. Even in the 90s, it was a lot easier to get an asylum. But now, since 2003, I think, or 2005, when the Real ID Act, the Patriot Act, etc., was passed, things got a little bit more tricky, and many people are not able to get that kind of deference that they used to get back in the days. So hopefully, but that's a system of checks and balances that we have to accept, because the truth is that you cannot just come and abuse the system, because genuine people end up by getting denied because bad people are abusing the system. And we see that in every aspect of immigration. So it's not only in asylum. We see it in marriage cases. We see it in you name it, employment based. You see it in everything you can imagine. A lot of people just make it like a fair play just to make up stuff. And by the way, again, as a footnote, it is common in many communities, and I'm not pointing out anybody, but they tend to kind of like to do things in a, I don't know how to put it. They would like to take shortcuts. You don't have to take shortcuts to win a case. I never take shortcuts, and I've been doing this for 17 years. And someone asked me last time, and how many cases I've handled, and I have handled a lot, thousands of them. And I stopped counting. I think only if I count the consultations, etc., I think almost like maybe 20,000. I don't know how many so far.
But at the end, we have two callers who are waiting to speak to you. So let's take these calls and let's see what they'd like to ask you. Okay?
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, you're on air with Attorney Shapir Ali.
Yes, sir. Thanks for taking the call.
You're welcome. Go ahead.
So I have a question. My parents have actually here and had on visitor visa and had applied extension for them because their I-94 was getting expired sometime this month. So what I want to know is, like, can I take travel with them outside of the USA, like Dominican Republic, which is some nearby island, but not as a neighboring attached island. So, is that still possible, or what will happen? And if that is true, then what will happen to the extension that I had applied to?
Okay, let me get the question right. So, you have applied for an extension, and you're planning to take a trip outside the country. Are you going to? Where are you planning to go? Mexico, Canada? What's the date?
Dominican Republic.
Yeah, you're going on a cruise, right?
Yeah, flight actually. Flight.
A flight, okay. No, don't go because, don't go. If you go, that extension will be cancelled, and you will need to, when you come back, they will if they have their stamp of their B1, B2 and their passport, they will give them a new I-94. But now there's another issue. If you leave, let's say for example it expires this next week, right? And you leave after next week, let's say in 2-3 weeks you go, there's a chance that they can cancel that visa on the passport. I'm not saying they will, because without a decision they usually don't do it, but they have a right to do that by operation of law actually. So if you're planning to travel before the existing I-94 expires. And then like that, when you come back at the airport, they will give them another I-94. Now there's another risk too. When you leave, when you have that extension, you travel outside and you come back, they have a right also to deny you, saying you just came here, why you want to come back here. So the best solution is not to travel, or if you travel before that existing I-94 expires.
I see. So, what is the reason of cancelling, or there's a potential reason for cancelling the visa stamp on the passport after you have expired, you have the I-94 expired when you travel? So you mentioned there's a potential reason for them to cancel the visa stamp on the passport. So, do you have details on why they can do that?
Yes, they can. It's under 200. I need 245J, I think, if I'm not mistaken, subsection J, which says that whenever you overstay on a visitor visa, by operation of law, technically that stamp on the passport get cancelled. However, okay, since you filed for an extension, you can argue that there was no overstay because the pending case gave them what we call a period of authorized stay. But it's a case-by-case basis. If they want to invoke that law on you, they can. And at the airport, when they see that, they won't let them in. So that's the risk that you take. Is under, I think, INA 245 subsection J, if I'm not mistaken. Okay?
I see. And if it was via cruise, is there still a potential issue, or it's only via flight, or both?
I can't hear you. I think there's an echo. Okay. Did you hear Ira? Can you repeat the question for me?
So, that if it is via cruise, is there still okay, or that's also still an issue regardless whether you travel by flight or a cruise?
The crews are a little bit more lenient because they can use the same I-94 if you travel within Mexico or Canada. But even that is not it's not advisable right now because there are a lot of issues going on, and the CBP is really they're really kind of under pressure. So the same rule will apply also on the cruise. I just wanted to ask because I love cruises, so this was just my curiosity. But it will be the same rule, unfortunately, because a cruise also has to go to the border. So the border can be the airport or the regular border. So the same rule might apply unless the I-94 is valid and you're traveling to Mexico, for example. You can revalidate that when you come back. Okay?
Okay, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good luck to you. Good luck. If you have any question, call me at the office, 510-742-5887. I think we have another caller, right?
We do. We have another caller. Hello, you're on air with Attorney Shapir Ali.
Yes. Yeah.
Hello?
Please go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I have a question that on my visa is job, then can there be a vacation between the last date of the first employer and the start date?
So your voice is breaking.
Yeah, it's breaking.
Very
I
clearly.
can't.
You said
I
if the
cannot-
H-1B visa is stopped, you said. Can't hear you. Can you call us back, because I think there's a problem with the network, your reception, and we can't hear you very clearly. Thank you. Listeners, if you also have any questions, call us right away on 510-657-1170. That's 510-657-1170. That's the studio number. Or if you'd like to get in touch with Attorney Shah and his team on the office number, you can even call right now as we speak to make an appointment, 510-742-5887. That's 510-742-5887. And the website is peerallylaw.com. That's PEERALLYLAW.com. That's PEERALLYLAW.com. He has LI in his name, so of course he's your friend. Attorney Shah, let's continue while the other caller calls us back.
Yeah, that's nice to hear that because I get a lot of version of my name. Like some people they call me Peer Ali, some call me Mr. Ali, one even called me Sherry last time. I don't know how she got that name, but that's kind of nice too. I have a long name, by the way, so I'm pretty international with my name itself.
Wow.
So it's going back to, I think the previous caller, I don't know if I couldn't hear, but I heard a little part. If an H-1B is kind.
Yeah, I think he's back. Let's see if we can hear him this time. Hello, you're on air with Attorney Shapir Ali.
Hello.
Visa, when candidates change job, what could be and how long it could be a vacation between the two dates, from the first employer last date to the next employer first date, starting date.
Oh, okay. Now I got it. So basically, when you're doing a visa transfer, you want to take a break in between, right? So
yes,
there's no really a limitation because it depends what the reason. Because under CFR 20 CFR, an H-1B vacation is kind of allowed. However, if you do it for too long, then USCIS might think you're on the bench. On the bench means you have the H-1B, but they are not paying you. And whenever this happens, it becomes a bigger issue. So there's no real timeline, but I will say don't do it more than 30 days because this can be an issue, maybe not now, but it might become an issue at a later stage when you file for your green card, when you have to prove that you have maintained status. So there's no real limitation on that. But the truth is that if you do it for too long, they will claim that you were on the bench, and that will cause more problems for you.
And follow-up question is that if after the visa transfer, candidate wants to stay in the same company and don't use the transfer, is it possible?
Oh yeah, that's another good question. The answer is yes. It's called an election. That means you can choose to stay or you can choose to go back. But this is a situation. if you file under the transfer, I think it's under AC 21 section 105B. If you transfer, you have a right to start working even upon the day of the filing itself. If you already moved to company B, for example, let's say you work for company A, you move to company B, and then by the time you move to company B, company A withdraw their H-1B, then if you decide to go back to A, it becomes a problem. But, if company A withdraw their H-1B and you try to go back to them, it will be a problem. But if you didn't move and you are already waiting for B to get an answer or get an approval with B, you can stay with A. There's no problem because A doesn't get cancelled until they revoke.
Yeah, so in that case, basically, a candidate needs to inform company A that he has recently transferred his visa, or it doesn't really matter anything. He can continue job as it was before.
There's nothing to inform USCIS. You just continue your job normal. Transferring a visa doesn't mean you are moving. You're just saying that you are trying to move the quota from A to B. If you decide not to move to B and A has not cancelled, you can just continue with A.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good luck to you. Good luck. These are very interesting questions because I get them very often, but I miss them until people ask them again on the show. Yeah, just to kind of clarify, if you have a transfer from A to B, and you want to stay with A and A has not cancelled, you can stick to A. You don't have to move to B. And if at a later stage B has not cancelled, you want to move to B also, you can do that. But it's not recommended just to wait too long because B will probably cancel if you don't move with them ASAP because then they will be responsible for you. So anything on your side, Ara, you want to ask me or any callers?
No, very, very interesting conversation. Very interesting questions also. We were getting another call that got dropped, but I'd like to remind everybody and also that caller that if you're listening and if you want to ask a question to Attorney Shapir Ali, you can call us right away on 510-657-1170. That's 510-657-1170. And listeners, we have Attorney Shapir Ali on air with us till 11 a.m. So if you have a question right now is the time. Or if you'd like to get in touch with him after the show to make an appointment, to speak to him in detail about your case, because, of course, it's immigration. So all of us are skeptical about everything. So if you want to have a private discussion, call him up on 510-742-5887. That's 510-742-5887. Even if you want to call on the studio number while the show is on, but keep it anonymous, that's okay too. If you don't want to give out your name, just ask about the situation and your question. That's completely fine with us. 510-657-1170. Yes, Attorney Shal, you were saying, you were talking about something before we started taking the calls. So let's continue from there.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of forgot exactly. We were talking about documents and asylum and fraudulent documents. So the same rule applies for everywhere. And the same rule applies if you have a visa interview at the U.S. Embassy, because I get that very often. Excuse me. People get a little bit panicky when they have to confront an officer at the U.S. Embassy, and they have good reasons too. So what they do, they tend to kind of shortcut answers or lie or try to give fake documents. So avoid that. If you don't know an answer, just say, I don't know. It's better not to know and get a denial just on other reasons than getting a denial and a fraudulent answer, which will put you in the section of fraud. And when you have fraud, that means you are going to be inadmissible for years and you might never get in, even you had a good case. So be very careful on that. And also, we were talking, of course, about the situation of the Biden new rule, reaccepting asylum for people who are victims of gang rape, etc., etc. And that's a sad thing that is happening all over the world, by the way. I see it too often than I hope to see, where we have situations of fights. And when I say gang rape, doesn't mean only a woman, right? They also boys, little kids.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, it's like for everybody, that can be victims. That's the sad part of wars and conflicts. People are being sold as much as cattle, right? So, and slavery is still there, even though we think it's gone. And we see that many times. And there are special visas for those, but for human trafficking, by the way. But at the end of the day, we are here talking about asylum for those people who are victims of domestic violence too. But it cannot be just like regular domestic violence, right? Something which is really deeper, where the entire village or entire community is going to be kind of taking revenge and things like that. And we see that we have those what we call the honor rape or things like that, where they will have the entire village or someone rape that person just because to punish them. And those kind of stuff were not being granted asylum under Trump, but now it's coming back, luckily, because they do happen. We do complain oftentimes about small things, and we don't realize really how much other people are suffering around the world. Maybe our brain doesn't want to know, because if we know, it's going to stop functioning. But unfortunately, with my job, I have to deal with those on a regular basis, and I imagine therapists and etc. who are dealing with those on a daily basis. It does take a toll on you, and shutting it down is very, very difficult sometimes. Any question, Naira, or any callers?
No. There was, like I said, there was a caller before, but there's no caller right now. But listener, we have 15 minutes. If you have a question, you can definitely call right now. And today's topic that we've been talking about, asylum and gang violence, like Attorney Shah said, we're not pointing at any community. It's prevalent everywhere, and not, just particular to one gender. Everybody, like any, all kinds of people suffer through it. It's not any one community or one gender which is being pointed out as the victim or being pointed out as the culprit. So if you know anybody who's been suffering with this thing, just like domestic violence, right? We mostly think that it's just women who suffer because of domestic violence, but it's not the case. It's also men who suffer with domestic violence.
Yes, that brings us to another topic too. It's actually now almost equal in the US.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, some people believe it's exactly equal or even more, because in many cases for men, they tend not to report it because of the taboo that is associated to it. It's kind of more accepted when a woman hit a man, because it's like many people take it as fun. He's getting beaten by the wife and things like that. But the truth is that equality means nobody has to hit on the other, right? As much as a man thinks he's a man, he's hitting on a woman, he's not. So the same rule is that if a woman thinks it's right to hit a man because, hey, she's a woman, that's wrong too. And most of the time what we see are emotional abuses. Now this brings us back to our petition. We have not talked about it a lot lately.
Yes.
All the things, like we have this H4 situation where, as you know, if someone comes as a dependent on the H1B, they come on the H4 visa, right? And the truth is that couples fight, that's normal. But sometimes the fight takes a next level where there are abuses from the spouse who basically controls the visa. So especially the spouse who is on H1, they will tend to abuse the wife or the husband, because they know their visas are attached to them. Now, the biggest problem that you face in those situations is that if the abuse is physical and the police are involved, the victim is eligible for what we call the U visa. The U visa is a very powerful visa, by the way. It ends up by giving you a green card within the next maybe 6 to 10 years, depending on the timing. But now, not everybody is eligible for the U visa. I repeat that. Unlike VAWA, where you have the Violence Against Women Act, where if the person is emotionally abused, you can use that to get a green card because your spouse is a green card holder. But when your spouse is an H-1B holder, you don't get those emotional abuse kind of cases. Although you can use that to get an EAD, you don't get any status with it. And unfortunately, that's causing a big problem because what's the use of an EAD if you're not legal? Right now, many people end up by taking the route of a student visa or some kind of humanitarian grounds visa, but it's not a solution. It's just a band-aid. And what we are looking for now with this petition is to actually find what we call a solution to that. It's not really kind of a temporary solution. There should be a solution which is more effective because we are talking about a lot of people. In fact, there was an article I think was published a few days ago. I don't remember. I remember seeing it. I didn't read the whole thing, but it seems like basically you have a situation where many people are victims of abuse and abandonment. And I think there was an article actually exactly on what we are talking about from the Center of Health Journalism. And it's called South Asian Woman in U.S. faces a new form of abuse and through abandonment. And in fact, now it seems like the situation is picking momentum, by the way, Ara. It seems more and more people are starting to talk about it. And that's what the idea was when we started the petition, is to create awareness, because that's how it starts. We create awareness. Then with the awareness, we get more and more people talking about it. So I recommend that people look into that petition. It's help the H-4 visa holders who are victims of abuse. You will see it on my petitions, my list of petitions. If you type my name on change.org, please sign it. We need more signatures so that we can start doing a change here. Unfortunately, with all the things going on around the world, it is a situation that we are going to see more and more often with the confinement or with the lockdown, because whenever you have the lockdown, you tend to have people kind of in one room and abuses start. It has reason. If you look at all the statistics, everywhere in the world, domestic violence has actually soared, and to the point that you are now seeing people getting more divorce after the lockdown than they should actually. It's just a situation of putting people in one room is always, especially if you're locked down or in shelter in a small apartment or something, it's human nature to fight. It's not only humans, it's the instinct. If you look at animals, they did a lot of tests on rats and everything. When you put them in a confined area, after a while, they start beating on each other, even eating each other. So it's a human instinct. And they did an experiment also in a dome one time, and they find out that something. I was just putting that as a footnote, and that's one of the reasons that is causing a lot of this. But at the same time, you have evil people who actually, when they bring in a spouse here, they tend to think that they own them, and that's the worst part of it. And when people feel this way, the abuses becomes normal, and actually the abused take it as normal too. So it's not a situation of just the abusers abusing the people. It's the victims, but the victims themselves feel like it's normal to be abused. Many things that were accepted in the past are now not accepted. The way you talk to your spouse, the way you treat them, the way you make them feel. Although we can say people have become more sensitive, but it made sense to change those, right? It's not about being more sensitive. We're living in the 21st century. We have so many things. We're going in space. Millionaires or billionaires are going in space now as fun. We cannot really go back to the old age. Although there are a lot of good things in the past, by the way. I'm very much, I like the past. I like history. There are a lot of good things back that we don't talk about. We always talk about the bad things. But at the same time, it's a new century, right? We cannot kind of go backward and start doing things that are wrong. And by the way, even in the past, it was wrong, except we didn't have Facebook to talk about it. So it's not like something new. So it is happening, and hopefully now with this petition, we hope that we will be able to change things, and I'm hoping to bring it to the next level, but we need more signatures from you so that we can at least write an open letter to the president and to the leader of the houses like Nancy Pelosi and everything, because they were very active in the VAWA. In fact, Biden, the VAWA, which is the Violence Against Women Act, was written in 1992 by Biden himself when he was a senator. So I'm hoping that he will be more receptive to all this. So let's see, sign the petition and pass the word. And I was very happy. I just I saw that article before. I didn't have a chance to really read it. Like I said, this week was a little bit hectic for me. I took a break a little bit, so I didn't really read the whole thing. But now I am reading it again, and I see that this is good. It is going to help our cause. So we need your support. Please sign the petition, and you can see it on change.org. Change.org, right? Yeah. So you will have it there if you look into my list of my petitions on Sharp Rally. Please do sign it, and hopefully we can make a change in there. I don't know how much time we are left, Ira, so I can't see the time really here.
Well, we have about 8 more minutes to go, or 7 or 8 more minutes. Listeners, the petition that Attorney Shah is talking about is, of course, available on change.org. But if you need an easier route, it's also on my Facebook page. So log on to Facebook, look me up, RJ Ira. It's facebook.com/RJIREE. And the petition is right on top, so you don't have to, go and look for it on change.org if you have to type the URL. It's easily available, or you can also look it up on Attorney Shapirali's profile. So it's available. Please sign it. Please, spread it, spread the word, share it with your friends and family. And like we always say, that more people than we know do suffer because of this. We know people who've come here, built a life, and just because the marriage doesn't last for whatever reason, they have to pack the bags and move back or do whatever is necessary. So it's an attempt to make those lives easier. So spread the word, please. Attorney Shah, about, let's say 6 or 7 more minutes left. Anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, just to recap today, we talked a little bit about this situation of reopening the asylum. So this brought us to all those issues that we talk about abuses. But, life is not only about abuses. There are a lot of things good happening also. People who are eligible for national interest waivers, EB1, employment-based trial, try it. And Attorney Sharif last week, I think the previous week actually, we talked about it extensively, and I think we repeated the show last week. And you have options, right? And one of the things that a lot of people now are asking are visa built-in, right? Well, I'm going to attempt to that just under a few minutes, because I don't like doing that because it's a forecast and people hold me to it. So don't hold me to it. And anything I'm going to tell you again is my opinion. You should not kind of take it for granted and think that, Shah said it, so it's going to happen. No, it doesn't work this way. I think the visa bulletin will progress. We're going to see a movement upward on EB3, bringing it up to maybe 2016 January. That's my feeling, and a lot of people feel the same. As for EB2, I think it will go up to maybe 2014, 2015, and then now the question is that what will happen next, right? Well, this will happen probably in October, and after that, once they start pulling in, people start filing a lot of cases, and there's no recapture of the time. We're going to start seeing a retrogression around April when they start deciding for the fiscal year. So, but again, like I said, it's just my crystal ball. So don't don't take my words for granted, because it's just a guess, an intelligent guess. That's all I'm doing. So bottom line, I highly recommend that you actually check with us and check your visa bulletin and see the trend by yourself, and then you can make your own guess, because as you, I'm just kind of guessing. The only difference with me is that I've done this for a long time, so I kind of get the feeling better how it moves. But at the end of the day, this thing moves in a very, the visa bulletin is a very kind of mysterious thing. They have never really kind of released all the information on it. So we are basing everything on just a guess. So that's another thing that I wanted to mention, the visa bulletin. And for the H4 EAD, the good news is that now we are not going to lose that H4 EAD, hopefully, like we were worried under Trump. Even Trump didn't take it away, by the way. He just kept playing with those guys who were suing and made them actually dismiss their claim, which was a good thing. So by him trying to be smart, it ended up by helping the H4 EAD. And I don't think Biden will actually let it go. And a lot of companies actually now are taking advantage of it, let's be honest. And that's why they're fighting to the teeth to keep it. And I'm very proud to say that it was a great and honor to fight for this. And hopefully now we can fight for another issues with the H4 and ultimately get things moving. So bottom line that you call us if you have any question, 510-742-5887. And also if you have any kind of if you want a second opinion in your case, we can do a consultation and look into it. Even if you don't want to hire us as a law firm, I do that a lot. So give us a call, 510-742-5887. And again, anything I'm telling you today is my opinion. You should not act or refrain to act solely on the information provided. You should contact an attorney if you have any question. I don't know how much time I'm left, Ira. I think we have another few minutes, right?
2 minutes, yes.
2 minutes. So, yeah, let me wrap up by saying that we mentioned today, we had a good questions on the transfer. If you're transferring from company A to company B, if you don't want to move to B, what happens? The answer is simple. If you have not moved to B yet and A has not canceled and you're still with A, you can just continue working for A. There's nothing to be done. But just be careful company B doesn't get upset and try to ask you to repay the expenses of the H-1B, which if it is reasonable, you can actually pay. If it is exorbitant, there is no rule that forces you to pay that. You can call us for that too. We can assess your case. Now, another thing which is which I see a lot right now are those AC-21 transfers, because people file under those EB-3s in October, and then 180 days has passed. They want to move to another company. Is that possible? The answer is yes. It's under AC-21, I think, section 104C, and you can do that. And if you want an opinion, if it is a good thing to move or not, give us a call, 510-742-5887. Just as a reminder, today, I think our phone, you will not get anybody answering today. Probably tomorrow you can leave a message and hopefully I'll call you tomorrow. And not tomorrow, but we'll schedule by tomorrow. Someone will call you. You can always email us. That's probably the best. info@Pirali Law. And you can get that on our website, piralilaw.com, piralilaw.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week, hopefully live with hopefully I'll have a guest next week, and we'll talk a little bit about more things. Ira, I think we are done, right?
Yes, we are. We are at the end of the show. Thank you so much, Attorney Shah, for joining us, for being here with us, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Attorney Shah, I will talk to you again next week. Thank you once again.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. You stay tuned to Radio Zindagi. Jiye Jaan.